Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Kirsten Lauritsen. Welcome to another episode. I have one of my friends and colleagues, Dr. Ryan DeBell, with us today. He is a chiropractor and also has his master's in sports or exercise science. Make sure I get that right. He also is the co-founder of T-Tool, which we'll talk about a little bit, and also the founder of the Movement Fix. So, Dr. Ryan, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Heck yeah, my unnamed show. So far anyway.
Unnamed. Well,
Yeah.
the name will organically develop, I guess.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Well, why don't you give us a little intro about, who you are and where are you at right now?
Yeah. So right now I'm standing and looking out the window at the city of Buenos Aires, Argentina. Yeah. So I'm down here trapped not trapped, but there's borders are closed basically.
Right.
And they have been for 60 something days. They actually quarantined us here before many other countries. Like I think it was just Spain, Italy, and then Argentina. And so we can only go outside to even go to a grocery store.
That's it.
That's it. Well, in the pharmacy, but I go to the grocery store every day, at least 2 miles away. So I'm always walking a couple miles every day.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I went to business school in undergraduate and studied that. And to give you some background.
Perfect.
And I studied the management of information systems and technology. So I learned a little bit about a lot of different technologies. And, kind of from the mindset of how you manage people who know each topic deeply. And I know all of the topics a little bit. So that was sort of the framework of that program. So I knew a little bit about how to program a database. I knew a little bit about how to write certain types of code. I knew a little bit about supply chain management, etc. So that actually really prepared me well, more from a framework standpoint than an actual information standpoint for what I'm doing now. Because now, I have T-Tool and I'm managing the supply chain, and we're doing digital marketing. And I've always had this mindset of knowing that I know a little bit about all of them, and where I need more in-depth knowledge, I feel comfortable, putting someone or delegating the roles, which is something that is actually way harder than it seems.
For sure.
Especially when you're first doing it, getting other people to do things.
Yep.
So yeah, I had a practice in Seattle that I had for 5 years that I started after I graduated from Western States, and then I sold that when I went to transition more to doing in-person workshops. And then that led to doing digital products, and that led to doing T-Tool. And so, yeah, I guess I'm actually not technically a chiropractor. I guess I have a doctorate in chiropractic.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
But I haven't practiced in 2 years. So okay. Yeah, I'm not practicing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so for those that are watching or listening, how I know Dr. Ryan is that he and I went to the same school, but we really met through CrossFit, and definitely through my sister, who you guys were all going to the same gym and stuff. And so I saw you in your practice in Seattle, and then you started doing a lot more online, creating more online. You definitely were doing a lot where you were going around and talking at different gyms and doing these seminars, which I thought was the coolest thing ever. And then you took that and you brought a lot of those things that you were teaching to the online space, and we're getting a lot more into that online course realm. And then from there, now you've been doing all sorts of things, but that's kind of how you and I know each other. And I think it's actually really interesting, that point that you brought up about managing topics and either knowing a lot of things on the surface versus knowing things a lot more on a deeper level. And I feel like a big portion of that also just leads into health and healthcare quite a bit, because sometimes I feel like we get this very surface information, right, about all these things that we know, and then it's kind of up to us to kind of dive a little bit deeper and learn a little bit more about what we maybe want to specialize in. Because sometimes I feel like we are we almost put ourselves in a pigeonhole when we do something and become very, very specialized. But at the same time, if we are so general, then I feel like we also miss things. So anyway, I like that idea though, of kind of knowing where you might want to go a little bit deeper, but maybe use people as well.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is intentionally and consciously choosing what you want to do with your time professionally to create value for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that will determine whether you specialize in a particular thing. And I think that, or to generalize and be in a different position where you're trying to more manage things getting done, and you're trying to put people in those particular roles. And so, I think that's hard for a lot of people when they, and I know I struggled with it a ton. And there's a mentality there when I feel like I'm confused, and especially during the pandemic, we have so much time to sit around, scratch our heads and think.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I doing everything I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
And reflecting on that, and I realized that while you're doing that, I'm a big believer that you don't know what you're doing at a period of time in your life until later, and you look back on it and you're like, oh, that's what I was doing.
Totally.
So I look at that and I'm like, oh, pandemic, it's, there's frustrations and I'm having like questioning, what am I doing? Blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized, oh, when I look back, I'll be like, that's when I figured out what to do next. I was figuring out what to do next. I was figuring out where that path is.
Mm-hmm.
But so whether or not to specialize in a particular thing, or because that's like, oh, should I specialize in this or this? Or
right.
If I do this, I'm limited from doing that. And who says that in our lives we can only do one thing really deeply either? Mm-hmm. If you just focus on doing what you're passionate about, and if that passion dies off, figure out what you're passionate about next, and then just go do that. And why can't your professional life be a series of those things? I don't know that it has to be one particular thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's okay to shift around. It's okay to, change what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think if you don't change what you do at some point, you kind of maybe weren't very intentional.
I would suggest maybe that would be the case for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it really comes down to knowing what you want and why.
Mm-hmm.
For both your life itself and for how you spend your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I was listening to actually a podcast yesterday, and they were talking about how so a couple of interesting points there. I mean, number one, I think this whole time has caused a lot of people, including myself, and it sounds like you as well, is just what's really important. What do we want to be doing? What are we, again, this shifting of passions, like what are you passionate about? We should be not should, but it is a great practice to be very intentional about what we want to do and how we want to serve people, especially as practitioners, right? Or just as people who are trying to, encourage just people to find what works well for them. But also that we don't necessarily have to be defined by the work that we do, right? You
should definitely not be defined by the work you do.
And I think that idea of being willing to shift, right, and what we professionally do, I think that there are a lot of us that are starting to figure out what we want to do, but that can totally shift and be something different. We can walk away from the things that we've done, and it can become something entirely different, or it can just shift and mold and bring on new things. So, yeah.
There's a mental exercise I like doing that it's called, I didn't invent this. It's called zero-based thinking. And it is, you ask yourself this question: knowing what I know now, if I had no history at all, and I could just look at only in the future with nothing I'm attached to, essentially, knowing what I know now, what would I do? And if that's different than what you're currently doing, you should probably address that. Otherwise, you're going to be frustrated all the time. Or you're going to end up 20 years down a path that you should have switched from 19 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. But even if you're in that position, that's one way to start looking into doing something a little
Mhm.
bit different for sure.
Yeah, I think that you always have to look at what is the next clear thing for you to do on the path. You have
Yeah.
to first decide, what are you trying to accomplish, right? Like,
Mhm.
what are your goals? And then what is the next obvious milestone on the path to that goal that you clearly identify, and then you execute at an outstanding level
Mhm.
until you've completed that, and then you'll know which thing is next. It'll become very obvious to you at that point. The
Yeah.
problem is people think about 3, 5, 10 steps down, and you can't necessarily see that
Yeah.
until you've gotten to the next obvious vantage point.
That's so perfectly timed too, because right now I am launching a migraine online course. So
Mm-hmm.
migraine relief, trying to find the idea of getting to the root causes of migraines, because so many
Yeah.
people treat the triggers, right? Or they just treat the pain while they get them and when they get them. And one of the things that I was saying is just during this launch, I was thinking like, okay, so what's that next piece, what's that next one down the line? And we're not at this point yet. So then I just easily got a little bit distracted by a few other things that I thought that I should be doing, and
Mm.
sort of reminded of the fact that just focus on one thing for now. This is what's the most important thing to be doing at this time. And just allow that to do its thing until you get, to that point where that next piece will come up, but you're not there yet.
Yeah, it's like you see it in sports all the time. Somebody, like let's say basketball, somebody is receiving a pass and they're too anxious to try to shoot it that they don't catch the ball first, and then they kind of mishandle it.
Mhm.
It's like, just, it's okay to go a little bit slower and do a really good job.
Yeah.
I think that we have this feeling of anxiety of we have to, do everything now, especially people
Yeah.
who graduate from any sort of medical program. When there's a substantial financial burden
Hmm.
with the clock ticking against you in a certain way, that creates an anxiety that is unfortunate. That's a byproduct of the, well, guaranteed government loans and then schools charging the maximum possible. I think that that is a seriously, talk about root causes to problems.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
stuff, and that causes a lot of problems for the healthcare providers too.
Mhm.
But I think
Yes.
that's part of why it happens, and it's okay. It's okay to go slower and just do things intentionally and try to do the best job that you can do. Then when that's done, figure out what to do next.
Mhm. That's pretty good. That could be applied to a lot of different things.
Oh yeah.
Right. So I'm super curious. So you had your practice, a
Uh-huh.
physical practice, and you were practicing as a chiropractor now. And when you made that shift to creating those online programs, how did you make that decision to do that? And are you loving that decision that you made? Do you ever want to go back to physical practice? I'm so curious, like where you're at with all of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, it was a really hard transition for several reasons. The reason number one is, I think when you're a provider and if you get into social media and you get into these things like that, you become identified with the work that you do. So then if you change from being a chiropractor to not, that creates a weird identity crisis in a sense, because it's like, I went to school to be a chiropractor. So if I'm not a chiropractor, what the hell am I?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, what am I? So then you have to deal with that, and dealing with that is a barrier. I think that prevents many people from achieving things that maybe they otherwise would have achieved if they want. I After being in practice for like 4 or 5 years, I just realized that's not what I wanted to do necessarily. I
Yeah.
still wanted to help people, but I like to build things. And being a provider is definitely not building something. I mean, you're building a base of clientele, but your day-to-day work is performing a service. And I like creating things, sort of like whether that's a business or a product or something. So I was always frustrated because I wasn't really doing what I enjoy the most. And there's a certain amount of, I think, I don't want to say embarrassment that comes with that, but going down a path and then realizing like, actually, I think I like doing other things more. But I think a lot of people do feel that way, whether they'll admit it or not. But I think some of those feelings prevent them from actually doing some of the things they enjoy. Now, I was only in my clinic Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday because I was traveling basically
Right.
every weekend or every other weekend, to do my workshops.
Right.
And I realized, like, look, I'm either going to be really good at educating or I'm going to be a really good clinician, but I don't have the capacity to be both. So I think what's happening is I'm running a okay clinic and I'm running an okay education company. And it was just too time consuming to do both. So then I got down to one day in my clinic. And then I realized I'm actually doing people kind of a disservice by not being more available.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to get out of my clinic some way. And when I actually made that choice, it was really weird. When I actually made the choice in my mind, okay, I'm going to figure out how to be in there never. The leasing agent for the building that I was in came in and asked me if I wanted to end my lease early because somebody wanted to rent the space. And then I ended up having an offer to actually buy the clinic 2 weeks after that. So within me making a decision, like within 2 weeks, I had 2 routes to exit the commitment that I had to finish the lease, which was the thing preventing me from actually making the move because I didn't want to be on the hook for thousands of dollars a month.
Right.
Yeah, no, I love what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
I love what I'm doing. It's super fun.
So,
and the way I think about what I'm doing is I'm figuring out how to help create value for people using what I know. So through Movement Fix, that is through education and programs that people can access themselves, who just, a lot of people just want to do something on their own and learn and read, right? So I spend my time producing that content, which takes tremendous effort. And then I also am making clinical products with T-Tool and other products that I'm developing to help other providers have better tools. So, and then I can I'm using my business background and like that kind of building desire to, I'm spending my time trying to do that.
Very cool.
And what I'd like to move into next is teaching other people how to do that stuff business wise. So I'm kind of running I'm running Movement Fix and T-Tool right now as sort of like my own experiments while I solve many business challenges to prove to myself that it works the way I think it works. So then I can teach other people the ways of doing it so other people can start doing it.
Yeah, I think that's a tricky part, right? It's in some ways you have to test the theory. That's so okay. So tell me a little bit more. I know that you have a lot of different courses, and I know that I've at least been familiar with some of the shoulder mobility ones, but this whole idea of the Movement Fix. So for people listening, you and I both have been in the CrossFit world for a really, really long time. And that's kind of where a lot of people have kind of seen that there's definitely some room for improvement with movement, right? And mobility. And so what was one of where did you start, right? I think you started, if I remember correctly, with a shoulder mobility and movement course. Was that?
Yeah. Well, whenever I go about making something, the way I approach it is I think of it in like 2 or 3 different ways. Number one is, what do I think should exist that doesn't exist? Or what exists that I feel like I could improve upon? Or what do I want for myself that I cannot get anywhere because no one's made it? And or what do other people need or want that I can help them with?
Yep.
So those are my criteria that I put something through when I decide what to make. So the reason I even started in the first place was because I was marketing my clinic and doing talks at gyms. I was just doing them for free. I just emailed every gym within a 20-mile radius of my clinic before it was open. I just started doing these talks. And then the first 2 gyms that I did them at, they both of the gym owners suggested to me that I do a full day workshop for trainers and make that, available to purchase and attend. An idea I had not thought of, but then 2 people mentioned it to me. And I always think that when I hear the same thing twice, it's the universe speaking to me.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which literally it is, because every human body is made up of energy in the form of matter.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
It's kind of weird when you think about that. Like,
for sure.
every atom, like, energy doesn't get created or destroyed, right?
No. Sure.
And so that means every part of you is as old as the beginning of time, essentially. Anyways, so I hear that a couple times and I go, okay, I'm going to try this, right? I think that's a sign for me to go after this pylon or this, waypoint. I forget what I said earlier. What did I call it? When I go to the next, landmark or whatever I said.
Right.
And so then I started doing those workshops, and they worked, and I made more money in my workshops than I did in my clinic. And I was like, oh, I see, there's a market here. There's a market here. And the reason I made my workshop the way it was the workshop I wish I would have had available to me. Oh, I forgot to say that. One of the things, especially with educational content that I do, is I think about making educational content for myself in the past. So that's kind of what Movement Fix Workshop was. If I were to teach younger Ryan the most important things I think he needs to understand, what would I teach? Okay, that's my curriculum. I think he needs to understand that the joints move like this. I think he needs to understand that certain lifts have these limitations. I think that he should know these stretches and drills are really important and how to do them. And then if I think about it like that, it's way more concrete of what is to be included and what is not. Otherwise, if you don't make something with the end person of who's going to be using it in mind, you're probably not going to make something as good as it could be. So in a lot of business books, they'll talk about, avatars, which is basically like, okay, maybe there's somebody who would take a migraine course who's a 50-year-old female who's sensitive to light and has nausea. Okay, and there may be somebody who's a 20-year-old guy who has migraines. And then so you think about that person when you're developing the different elements of your program and the way that you talk about it, so it connects with them and makes sense for them. Mm-hmm. But I like thinking about teaching my younger self. Like, I'm eventually going to write a book, and I'm going to write it to myself. Like, that's going to be the whole way that I focus on doing it. And I think it makes it sound more natural. Like, I'm actually going to think about, I'm writing it to Ryan 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yep.
But so when I started making the programs, to answer your original question, I think the first one that I made was a shoulder program. Mm-hmm. And the reason I did that was because I made the initial products out of what I had seen the most in my clinic that I felt like people could do on their own.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, tons of people have shoulder stuff. They don't know what to do. I'll make a shoulder program. A ton of people want to work on their hips and their lower back. They don't know what to do. I'll make that. And I'll just make what I would make for myself if I was going to be doing that. So one of the programs I made recently is called the Daily Dose of Movement. And I wrote that as, okay, if I were to write myself right now, for myself currently, a program to make sure that over time I don't miss any joints that I want to make sure I'm addressing with range of motion and control, what would that look like? So I wrote that, and then I realized, it could basically just be 90 days that you could do over and over and over again. So that was the intention when I made that program, for example. And then, then I made I made some other programs with other people, because there were things I wanted to exist that didn't exist, but I didn't have the expertise to write them, like a handstand program. So then I worked with my friend that I went to, he went to Western States also, Wes Hendricks, who does all of this gymnastic stuff, but he has a background as a DC also. And so I worked with him to get a really good handstand development program out of him into a format that other people could use themselves. And then we did that with muscle ups and pull ups. And then I made a couple other programs with a couple other people with that intention of, I'll make cool stuff that people can do.
Right.
Basically. And I don't know how to do it all. So I'm going to work with people who do, and then we can, it's a joint project.
Yeah. The joint projects are the cool ones, I feel like, because you get two people, right, that are usually coming from maybe similar backgrounds, but definitely with different things to offer because they have different experiences. Yeah. And just like you mentioned, like when you get two people that have experiences that led them to where they are, they can definitely go back and say, what would I have wanted to know? I would say I really resonated a lot with what you just said, which is that like making like an online course, especially one that's very close to what you felt like you needed at that time, is huge. I mean, I suffered with migraines. I got my first one when I was 16, and so I know from my journey what I went through and what I had to figure out in order to get rid of them. And so I, essentially have created a course that is designed to help somebody walk through that journey as well, similar to mine, but also with the additional stuff I've learned by going to school and things like that. So,
right.
Yeah.
That's why I love reading people's books.
Oh, yes.
Who have spent so many years on a topic. And like, let's say you read someone's book and they wrote it when they were 60, and it was essentially like everything that they wish they would have known when they were 20, right?
Oh, yeah.
You can basically like gain 40 years of experience in some sense in like 10 hours. Mm-hmm. And so think about if you read, 10 books a year, you're going to gain like 400 years. Sometimes I think like if you took you could become mentally much older than your age, right? If you consume the knowledge and the wisdom of other people through the format of books or podcasts or whatever. Mm-hmm. That just was never available before the internet and before the printing press, especially, but definitely now we have the ability to learn so much from so many people. It's pretty crazy, actually.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why I actually really like doing these types of interviews and things, that whatever you want to call them, because you do get to have these amazing conversations with people that you might not have had a similar conversation with before. And I always end up learning so much, and that's mm-hmm. one of the reasons why it's just a fun thing to do. And I think that I like to consume this type of media. So it's nice to create something that I, am interested in. And I know that a lot of other people are interested in as well. Quick question for you. As far Sure. as making that daily dose of movement, that's something that I think is a huge self-care piece that mm-hmm. I know for myself. Self-care doesn't necessarily look like going and getting a massage or paying for a facial or doing things like that, right? Which have for more or less been taken away from all of us at mm-hmm. this point, right? Yeah. But I have this year in particular have made a huge shift in my self-care to doing things that are very intentional every single day. So doing something like a meditation, which sometimes is like 30 to 60 minutes. Sometimes it's 5. It totally depends on the day and what's on that, what's going to happen that day. But the other piece that's really important is getting in that daily movement. There's so much to learn from it. And there's a lot that like our body needs when we do things like daily movement. It sounds like you're getting at least 2 miles of movement in every day when you're walking to the grocery store, right? Being intentional about that time. But there are some other pieces of daily movement that are really important. I mean, we don't just use Well, when we walk, right, we use our shoulders, we use our back, we use our legs, but there's some other movements that we can do on top of that that have a lot more of an impact.
Oh yeah. I think people neglect their, if I was the emperor of the world and I had the ability to tell everybody to do something, it would be to do foot and calf exercises.
Yes.
Because
All day long.
well, just at least once a week.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Can you imagine if I showed you my hand and I couldn't move my fingers? You'd be like, that's crazy. Well, you can't do it with your foot. What do you think what part of your body has the most load on top of it? It's your foot, because it's the bottom. It's literally it's literally this weird thing that you have at the bottom part of your body that interacts with the surfaces that move you around. Why would you not want that to be as developed as possible?
Yep.
We just put this extremely incredible structure inside of this block of material, and wonder why we have knee problems and hip problems. Well, it's because, can you imagine, if my hand was like this and I had an elbow problem, wouldn't you say, maybe you should make sure that your hand is being a hand?
Yes.
Because if your hand isn't absorbing load, if your hand isn't doing certain things, you're going to make up for that at a different joint. And so if the foundation is not working correctly, you could have all sorts of things going on above. Maybe because you don't push off with your toes, you end up swinging more with your hip, and then your hip gets irritated. There's so many things that, and not to mention, as we get older, getting around is something that you want to make sure you can move yourself around.
Yeah. Yep.
And where does that interaction start? It starts with your feet on the ground.
Absolutely.
So build up the base, make sure you can wiggle your toes around, make sure you can do this kind of stuff, make sure you have strength in your calves. I think people's calves, the calf complex gets, and the muscles in the feet get so undertrained that, and then people, they'll go to the gym and do a bunch of glute exercises, but it's like, yeah, it's fine, but don't neglect your feet. That would be my decree. But I think also understanding how to move your spine. We get pretty, in chiro school, we look at the spine so much, right? We dissect the whole body. We look at the model all the time. What a crazy structure the spine is. And you have one. You have one that you get, and you get one. Mm-hmm. And you should learn how to move that thing, and you should learn what it does, because this is what, through the pandemic and being locked in, especially, have you watched, you've watched Avatar?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. When Jake Sully first gets consciousness in his avatar body. Yes. Okay. Sometimes when I meditate, I try to, do all sorts of things. And then when I open my eyes, I try to open it like it's my first time in this body. Mm-hmm. And I try to look and be like, what would I need to know about this thing to make sure that I knew how to take care of it until I died? That's what I'm trying to do with Movement Fix, is make those resources available. So you have a spine, the different, you can move different parts, and that's attached to this. And if you know that, then you know that if this feels weird when you're doing this exercise, like if you're trying to stretch out overhead and you feel it in the top of your shoulder, it's because it's pinching, and it's probably pinching. Why? Well, then maybe there's some other part of your spine or other part of your body that's not orienting the socket of the shoulder in a way that prevents that. Right. So,
and I think that's a really big point, right? Because we can have shoulder pain that may be locked up because something in our spine is locked up. And I'm, of course, oversimplifying things a little bit, but there are so many connections, between the shoulders and our foot. There's, literally there's fascial connections that can connect those two together. So if you move every piece of your body every day, and you can feel if an area is tight, or if you can feel if an area isn't moving as well, then you first off know somewhere to work on, right? And then second, you just don't know what you're potentially preventing, right? I always like to talk about, injury reduction, or reducing our risk of injury is huge. But also just, and doing that really through movement, but also doing that through identifying, well, what else do you need to do in order to take care of your body, right? Because there's not just movement. There's also a lot of health related things as well, right? Like if your GI tract is super inflamed, that also could be contributing to knee pain. That also could be contributing to shoulder pain. There's lots of things that an inflamed body can feel that is both potentially movement and internal.
It's interesting too. Imagine that you didn't know the written language of English. Okay. Like you could speak it, but you didn't know what the letters were. Now, there's a lot of people in the world that maybe they don't know how to write. Okay. Yeah. There's some percent. Imagine what you can do with a computer knowing how to write with a keyboard. You have an entire galaxy of options open up to you because you know the language. Now you can get on, you can just grab your phone, which is a piece of glass, close your eyes, and you can type information that gets like there is a world of things that open up to you. When you know the anatomy of your body, you just learned the basic. Think about how that world opens up to you when you understand the structure of your own physical being. Now it's like, oh, that's why you don't do that. Yes, it is. And that, like, imagine what you feel in your own head and neck, having, suffered from migraines, compared to what I feel. I probably don't have any sort of like ability to feel and be aware the way that you do, because I've never explored that, right? And we can explore that in all sorts of things. One of them, which is super important, is this physical body that we have. Yeah. And, having it feel good and being a master of it, understanding this construct of the joints and where the muscles are and what's underneath the skin. It's empowering. Yep. Literally, it's empowering.
That's a huge benefit too, to a lot of the online courses that people have now at their fingertips, right? It's the idea that they can get a lot of this information and learn it on their own. That's a huge thing. And I can't speak for all of them, right? But there are a lot of online courses that are doing a very good job at just helping you gain a little bit more knowledge as to what is happening, and that just continues to move you forward. You always start somewhere, and then it's a journey.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And there's a lot to be explored. I think
a ton.
The problem, in my opinion, is not a lack of the availability of information. It's people's willingness to actually try.
Sure. Yeah. Yep.
So many things it's funny, right? How many people have read tons of nutrition books and yet they still eat like crap? It's like, at some point, execution is the thing you need to do. Like
taking action.
Yeah. You actually have to do the things. And so I think that happens too with so much information being available, oftentimes because we know it's available and therefore it's not rare. It's like, well, it's there if I need it, and I don't really need it.
Right. Yeah.
Imagine if there was one book in the world that explained the entire inside of a human body. Can you imagine how valued that book would be if there was one?
Yep.
But it's, you can get it in any moment on your phone, so we don't even bother to look. And that's true for a lot of areas.
Yeah.
Everything you want to know is on the internet for free somewhere. The
Right.
organization of it and the
Right.
execution and the consumability, those are
Mhm.
the things that are where the problems are, I think.
I'm pretty sure that was the first piece of advice that you gave me. I think when I started my practice in my business is, I think you said like everything pretty much is available on the internet. You can learn just about anything, but a lot of it is about putting it into action. And if you can be somebody that puts it into action and you like literally do the things, you're going to get so
Yes.
much further, because there are going to be a lot of people who just maybe know the information, but don't actually do it.
There's a big difference between, imagine you were a fly on the wall watching yourself. Would you actually see the things getting done?
I had to
Or would
learn
you,
that for
or would you,
sure.
yeah, or would you see yourself and then what you can't see is inside the mind of that person. There's all these thoughts going on, but nothing actually happens.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. No, but it's true though. I mean, I think also one of the transitions that was very difficult for me was that I knew how to operate inside of this system where you went to school. I knew how and when to study. I knew how to take an exam. I knew how to do all of those things. But then when it came to learning an entirely different system, which is not only running a business, but treating patients, there's a lot that you have to learn in that scenario that does not fit inside of what I knew how to do. So
Yeah.
it's very, very different.
I think that for most of our lives, the construct is provided for us.
Yeah. Yep.
If you're going to start your own business, you make the construct.
You do.
And people get crushed because they don't know how to make a construct. Like anybody can do anything. It's literally, if I gave a list of actions to somebody to take and those actions got completed, there would be a result.
Yep.
It doesn't matter who does the actions, really. I mean, it really doesn't. Certain things, I mean, certain creative tasks, there's some, but there's certain tasks that if they got accomplished, you would get some business result.
Mm-hmm.
The problem for most people is they are in now a world where there's no construct provided for them. There are no deadlines except self-imposed deadlines. That usually turns into operating just enough to not run out of money. Instead of trying to actually win, they're trying to not lose. So then you're reacting to a deadline of not losing. But you have to create a construct to win and then hold yourself to that construct, which is a challenging thing to develop.
Literally what you just said in a sentence or two, I've had to learn over the last like 4 years.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But the weight of that though is huge. Like if I could give somebody one takeaway, that would be it. It's just, yeah, I mean, that's amazing. Okay. Well, I'm going to make a complete shift. I want to talk a little
Let's
bit
do
about the
it.
T tool.
Sure.
So what is it? And yeah, let's just talk about what it is, because I know that we've mentioned it a few times. So for somebody that's listening.
Yeah, it's a soft tissue treatment tool. I mean, technically it's a piece of metal that we shaped in a certain way that's extremely beneficial for people who perform manual therapy, like in essence. And so, there's a lot of manual therapy tools on the market that are flat pieces of metal that are used to scrape the skin. It used to be under the idea that there was like scar tissue that was being broken up via the angle of the edge, which I don't think is really panned out to be true. I think there's a lot of mechanisms. I don't think that's one of them. But they weren't ergonomic.
Definitely not.
They are not ergonomic. They're slippery.
Mm-hmm.
And so one company had them, Graston, who really pioneered that technique. And then they had a patent. The patent ran out. And then you got the market flooded with basically duplicate knockoff tools, which all essentially followed the same theme of being a flat piece of metal with a beveled edge. I'd always wanted to make something like one of these tools. And I was at my friend's house and he showed me a prototype of a tool that was like 3-dimensional instead of being flat. And he said, "Hey, I made this prototype. Are you interested in doing this? Are you interested in being my business partner in making this?" And I looked at it and I held it and I played with it. And I was sitting there for like maybe an hour kind of talking to him about it. And I realized that whole hour I had kept it in my hand and I was like twiddling it around. And I went, oh my gosh, this is actually really comfortable to hold in my hand. Like it feels way more natural to hold than like this flat piece of metal. So I said, all right, let's do it. And so I dropped all the plans I had because I was planning to teach like 20 workshops that I had been scheduling around the world. Because I had set this goal that I was going to teach workshops around the world and travel clockwise around the world, like a full circumference. So I was going to do the Western US, Eastern US, Europe, Middle East, Asia, Australia, and then South America, and then up to North America. And I canceled all of those to work on T-Tool.
Wow.
So we made it. It's really hard to make.
Yep.
Had to spend at least a year trying to figure out how to make it, because it's really easy to make a flat piece of metal. You just, talk to a company that has a machine that just cuts the flat metal into shapes, and you just give them a design basically. But we had to make this in a different way because of the way it is shaped, which was extremely challenging to do. So that's why we made it. And then made an online course to go with it to be basically the user's guide.
Perfect.
So
it
was certainly challenging because I didn't know how to do any of that before.
Yeah, for sure.
So basically it was like a decision that we're going to do this and then we'll figure it out no matter what. I mean, those are the two things you have to decide. Right. I'm going to do this and I'm either going to figure it out or I will die before I figure it out.
Absolutely.
And that was the mindset that I had. It's going to get figured out or I'm going to die in the process.
That's the only way to do anything, right? Like you have to commit, like you have to say, like, I'm definitely going to accomplish this. And this is going to be what I'm going to create. And that's it.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
unless there's a major pivot that makes more sense as you get down the road. I mean, but
it happens.
Otherwise, you have to have that mentality, because if you're just kind of like, well, I'll see if I can figure it out, you're not going to do it.
Nope You're going to get
figure it out. You're going to figure it out or you're going to expire before you solved it.
Yeah, for sure. So can somebody, I get asked this all the time by patients, can they get the T-Tool and can they use it themselves?
Yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, it's certainly, people can buy knives and guns. People can definitely buy a T-Tool.
Yes, for sure.
No problem.
And I think that online course, probably helps them out a little bit in how to use it well.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't design it for people to use on themselves, which I think is reflected both in the way the website is worded, because I'm trying to speak to providers. Sure. And also I think, the way we made it out of metal, it's not a cheap thing. It's $300.
Right.
But I may make less expensive ones in different type of thing, but for people, which will be way cheaper because it won't be a clinically designed tool. I mean, because there's a lot of things that you can make it out of that it'd be way easier.
Gotcha.
I think for the applications that we want, which is scraping, pin and stretch, having it be metal, and metal is way easier to clean. Mm-hmm. And it's more durable. So it's like I think of it as a professional grade product, but you could buy a professional grade camera, right? And still use that yourself as a consumer. Absolutely. So I kind of think of it that way.
Yeah. Well, I know I love it.
It makes me happy. I'm glad you love it.
I'm pretty sure, let's see, I think I've had it since January and I consistently grab it over another one of the tools that I have. Just as you said, ergonomically in my hand, it fits way better. My hand doesn't hurt at the end of the day, which is huge.
Yeah.
And then also, because of its size and the way that it fits, it's very easy to use on larger muscles. It's easy to use on smaller muscles. There's all sorts of different edges. There's a ton of different ways to use it. I personally am like literally obsessed with it. It's a great, great tool. So I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned it because I thought
What's
it's
your,
pretty neat.
in what way do you find that you use it the most? I'm curious. Like, in what parts of the tool do you use the most to treat?
Definitely that beveled edge. Like there, because you have a flat end on one, and then you have a little
Mhm.
bit more of an angled one on the other.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and it's that side, and I see a lot of people with a lot of like shoulder trap type stuff, and that tool fits so well to not only
Mhm.
get into the supraspinatus, but to get into the trapezius. But then I can also get into kind of some bigger muscles with like lats, and especially into teres, and then like that's a whole complex. It's just phenomenal to get into
Mhm.
all the different areas. But then also I'll use it around the knee too. So one of the things that I had, well, I'll use it all over. So let me not be like,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a ton of different areas to use it. But another way that I've really liked is that still, again, that angled edge, for just dealing with all of the tissues just around the knee and dealing with some of the ligaments and a bunch of different areas there. Also turning it over and using that round part
Yeah. The dome.
for, yep, to get into like big low back QL areas, stuff like that, that it's so much easier than, first off, having to use my hands, because my hands, as I said, get very, very tired at the end of the day. And I prefer to try to protect my body as much as possible.
Yep.
I think that's a huge thing if you're going to be like a chiropractor or whatever, is like try to protect yourself as much as you can so that you can do it for a very long time. But this tool like really helps to use on, especially that domed edge, is to get, really into those bigger lower back muscles and stuff like that.
Mhm. Yeah. It's
Favorite.
awesome.
It's great.
Yeah. It's
So great.
a lot of thought went into making that.
Yeah. So you traveled around a lot before you ended up in Argentina.
Hmm.
Is that, yeah? Was
Hmm.
there, well, first off, how did you end up in Argentina? And how did that become, kind of where you're at right now? And then where else were you traveling around to? Were there a couple favorites?
Yeah. Well, so I was married for a while, and then that ended. And so I had this opportunity to put my, kind of do whatever I wanted at that point, because it was
Yeah.
also right after I sold my clinic. And I said, well, I'm going to travel around because it's what I want to do.
Yep.
So I actually studied abroad in Argentina when I was 20, and I studied Spanish. So my friend and I were traveling around, Anthony Gustin, who maybe you know Anthony.
I don't know him personally, but we can link some of his stuff here
Yeah.
too. He's great.
So
He's
yeah,
another
he and I,
person to go check out too.
yeah, he's doing a lot of big things. So
Yeah.
he and I made this journal together called the Daily Domination Journal.
Yeah.
And we printed like 1,000 copies of it. And we said, when we sold all the copies, we were going to take a trip. So then we went to Argentina. This was in 2018. And then so we were in Argentina. Well, we were in Australia because I taught a class there like 2 weeks before. So we went from the US, and he wanted to go to Australia too. And I had a big class there. So we went to Australia, we flew back to the US. And then a week later, we went to Argentina. And then, and then I ended up staying a month because I met Paola while I was
Yeah.
here,
Yes.
who's awesome.
Uh-huh.
And so I was going to stay here for like, well, I actually didn't have, we only had a we booked a one-way ticket to Argentina in November of 2018. And so I had no return ticket, and I met Pao. And so I just stayed. He went back because his
You
company
stayed.
was growing really fast. So he needed to go back and manage it.
Yeah.
And I ended up staying a month. And then I came back 3 months later to stay another month to hang out with Pao.
Yeah.
And then I came back again. And then she quit her job, and we were like, all right. Because she was doing like a digital growth marketing.
Oh, cool.
And so it was like, hey, do you want to just, because we got along super well. It was really crazy.
Yeah.
And it was like, hey, do you want to just like work together on these projects and So she said, okay. She quit her job. And then we went to the US for 3 months, and then we went to Thailand, and we lived in Chiang Mai, Thailand for 5 months.
Oh my goodness.
And
How cool is
then,
that?
yeah, it was awesome. And then we went and lived in Prague for 3 months. And then we went from Prague to Argentina. And then I've been here for the last 12 months.
Okay.
I guess it's been a year since I got here.
Wow. How cool is that? Indonesia
Yeah,
is one of the places that is on my list. I've been trying to get there for it's probably been about 5 years now. I've had a couple of trips that like I've about to book, and then something has happened and just not been able to go. And then Prague was another area where when I was right after college, I went and I traveled all over Europe. And Prague was one of the areas that I just couldn't quite make it to. I made it to Germany and I was like, okay, the next place on my list. And then I never made
Your
it there.
Czech Republic.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. Yeah, so, man, we covered a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. So I wanted to say, so so anybody that wants to find anything that we talked about today, they can find it at themovementfix.com. Is that correct?
Yep. Or the ttool.com.
ttool.com. And if they're interested, especially because I think that the importance of daily movement is a daily dose of movement, I think if I could stress anything, I would probably stress that the most. Yeah. And I think just the importance of having a guide, right? I think it's very, very helpful to have somebody walk you through what maybe you should try, what you can do. It's very difficult to try, for me personally, I would say, to set a goal and then be like, I don't even know where I start.
Yeah, especially when it's material that you may not be really familiar with.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, that's at themovementfix.com under programs. You can see daily dose.
Perfect. Yeah. So I'll make sure to link that as well so people can find that. And where can they follow you?
So me personally at Ryan DeBell on Instagram, and then Movement Fix is at Movement Fix on Instagram, and then T-Tool is at the T-Tool. So I used to, for those out there who kind of like combine you have to really make a conscious choice of separating yourself from your business, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think it's easy not to do that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I try very intentionally to do that, to keep myself sane.
Yes. It's hard to do. I'll say that for sure. I think that's another benefit. Well, I think that's a benefit. I think it's another benefit of what came out for me, especially with this recent stuff with COVID and whatever, the social isolation and all that jazz, just how it impacted my clinic, but also how it's impacted my life, just simply because I had to slow down quite a bit in some ways, and showed me some areas that I can definitely work on for sure. But having a personal life is a big deal. Not working all the time is a good thing.
Yeah, I think, I try to think of my businesses as being this like game that lives inside of a briefcase. And I keep each business in a briefcase mentally in a closet. Yeah. And when I'm done, I close it and I put it in the closet. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you just kind of like have this game of business that's mixed with your life, and it's
and then it's constant.
Cluttered. Then it's constant.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know when you're playing your game. And I say playing game because it kind of is. It's a game where it's a value creation game. Mm-hmm. You're trying to create more value than the price that you're charging. Yeah. And the winner is the person, the winner is everybody in that game if you do it right. Yeah. But yeah, you have to know when you're playing and when you're not playing. Mm-hmm. It's not fun to play basketball 24/7. You have to have a time when you're on the court and you're playing, and a time when you're not. Mm-hmm. And when you're playing, play hard. And when you're not playing, enjoy the other parts of being alive,
Do something else.
Yes.
Yes.
Do anything else. Yep. That's something. I lived in this apartment before this one that I'm currently in. And Uh, the kitchen floor was super dirty. It was disgusting.
Oh,
And so,
yes, this is something I wanted to ask you about as well.
yeah. And so every time I stayed a place, because I listened to a lot of like self-development stuff,
Yeah.
and I have over the last 2 years especially. And so one of the guys, Jim Rohn is his name, I believe he's the one who said this. Whatever you touch in this world should be better off because you touched it.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I think of that in two ways. I think of it with inanimate objects. Like if I'm going to stay in an apartment for 10 months in the last apartment I was in, I'm going to do something so that that apartment is better because I stayed there. If I interact, and then with a person, if I'm going to interact with a person and take up some of the time, in their life, they should only have, there should be like a surplus in their life because of their interaction with me. So with the apartment, I decided I was going to clean the kitchen floor, because I would clean it, like I would mop it, but it would stay dirty. And I was like, I wonder if I can actually, so I got a sponge and I like really got in there with the sponge. And I was like, oh, this is 20 years of Buenos Aires street dust plastered in.
Mm-hmm.
So it was tile. It was a tiled floor. And I decided, not only am I going to leave this apartment a little bit better than I found it by cleaning this kitchen floor, I'm going to do it in a way that's going to develop a part of me that needs to develop, which was this. I'm going to limit myself to doing 5 tiles a day. Okay?
Yep.
5 tiles a day. And the reason I did that was because it forced me to be consistent and to do what almost seemed like not a significant amount of work in a day. And the result was 10 days later, I had a perfectly clean floor, and I never spent more than 10 minutes at a time. And I realized if I had ever approached that and said, today I'm going to clean the kitchen floor, you know how I would have procrastinated that? Because I'd be like, man, this is going to take me 4 hours.
Right.
I don't want to even start. So then I won't start. Mm-hmm. So I knew that's a weakness of mine, is that I try to do too much in a day. And because I try to do so much in a day, I do less overall. So I used that as an exercise for myself, tied in with a thing that would benefit, the apartment for me having lived there. So now, like, what that's done is when I approach my work and I schedule out my week, because I'll schedule out the month and the week and then what I'm going to do each day. Mm-hmm. I go, okay, actually, if I do a little bit less per day, but I try to do a better job and understand that it's not about how much you do in the day, it's about how much you do in the week, it's about how much you do in the month, it's about how much you do in the year. There's a better way to do it than try to crush for 5 hours.
Yep.
So I don't do it that way anymore. Okay. Now I go, I'm going to be okay just doing a little bit, and just that's going to accumulate into something larger.
I like that. I'm actually right now doing a 66-day journey of 66 days where I am waking up at 5 a.m. for the most part. That doesn't happen every day, but I'm trying to start my day the same way with I got this from a book actually, and I can link it, but it's 20 minutes of movement, then 20 minutes of like either meditation, journaling, something like that. And then 20 minutes of either self-development, listening to a podcast, learning about business, some way that you can grow. And what I'm also tying into that time is figuring out how to, what I'm calling more or less like engineering my day, but not just for more focus, but also just for the best productivity in a way that doesn't lead to burnout. But really in the end leads to, just as you mentioned, creating something very, very awesome, but it like over time, right? Like you can get just taking those small steps every day means that you'll actually get it done.
Yeah.
Like you think about creating this huge online course, right? Nobody wants to do that.
No.
You think about the hours of time that it's going to take to create this thing, and you want it to be so useful. But if you think about, okay, so I'm going to record all these different things in this day, and then I got to create all of these different resources, right? Like you start to look at that and you're like,
Yeah. Project
right?
management skills.
Project management. So that's one of the things I've been looking at is,
Mm.
how many hours do I really need to work in a day? Or is it just that I need to be looking at different projects in a day and then breaking that down? Anyway,
Mhm.
there's lots to
Or,
dive into that.
how many hours do you think you're supposed to work in a day, and why do you think it should be that way?
Yeah, that's another one. Yep.
I
Yep.
timed myself. For like a month, I timed every activity I was doing, and only when I was doing the actual activity, like even if I went up to go to the bathroom, I stopped it and I categorized it based on every different task I was doing. I had a really hard time breaking 3 hours. I'll be honest. 3
Yeah.
hours of extremely focused, actual productive work. I mean, I barely ever got above 3 and I was exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
I think we waste so much time. It's like, look, if you just worked for 3 hours and did the most important stuff, you're better off than sitting around fiddling around for 8 hours thinking that you're working hard when you actually didn't achieve as much. And then you feel like, well, I'm tired, so I did a good job, as if being tired is a indicator of the effectiveness of what you did.
Right.
I set out the monthly objectives, and then I challenge myself to see how fast can I do it. Not how many hours does it take me. If you do it right, you should be seeing how few hours can I do this in.
Yep.
Why would, like
Yep.
the hours don't matter. What matters is the value that you create. The hours are irrelevant in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that's helped me a lot is, because it's always a project. This is always a project. Putting the thing, like for the day, categorizing what things have to get done. That's number one. And then and then ranking them in the order of the ones I least want to do to the ones I most want to do. And this doesn't just work. This is also exercise. It's also reading, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I used to do was I would spend so much time in the morning doing all this personal development and reading and journaling and meditating, and I'd do it for hours and
Yep.
hours and hours.
Yeah.
And I realized that if I put that at the end of the day, it's good for me, but I enjoy it. What I don't like doing is some of the work I have to do sometimes. So I force myself to do the things I don't want to do that must get done first. And I just bang those out. And then at the end of the day, I can read and meditate because and exercise, because I'm going to do that stuff anyways because I like it. But if I do that stuff first, then the things that I don't want to do that need to get done don't end up getting done because it's towards the end of the day and I'm like, well, it's getting late and maybe I'll just do those tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I make myself like,
Yeah.
you can't do the fun stuff until you do this.
Yeah.
So
that's great though, because it's two different people, right? Like for me, I thrive off of getting started that way. And for you use it as a reward almost.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I happen to be a lot more productive when I start my day very focused. And then I'll, usually go and do like my Ironman training at the end of the day when I have a lot more time. But if I start my day that way, then if I just start my day with an hour of just very intentional, focused time that I give to myself, then I'm just that much more on top of feeding myself well and like actually cooking really good food. And then I get right into work, and then I just notice that it snowballs throughout the rest of my day. Versus if I put it at the end. So I just think that's really cool because there's never one way to do anything, right?
No, there's not. You have to know about yourself. Like,
yeah,
I will procrastinate until the last minute if I don't, that's my lower self operating. Right. And then so what I ended up doing was I would procrastinate until the end of the month.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I would get everything done at the end of the month. And then I ended up being able to just procrastinate until the end of the week. So I'd get everything done, but by the end of the week. And now my struggle is procrastinating until the end of the day.
Okay.
So that's why I'm at this day thing, because I realized that's where I struggle. It's I leave it for the end of the day, but that's better than the end of the month.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's never like it's always going to shift But yes, you're right. It is
Yeah.
better than just leaving it to the end of the month for sure.
Well, yeah, I think you try to find, like, when you do time of self-analysis or self-reflection,
Yeah.
if you take yourself through a series of mental cues, it's like, how can I be like 1% more efficient?
Yeah.
What would that look like? And then, or like, what is the version of myself in 10 years that is, would absolutely destroy me? What are they doing that I'm not doing? How are they operating that I'm not operating that way? That person's probably like, he wakes up and he's like, boom, 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 done, turns it off, enjoys the rest of his day. I know that future Ryan does that. So that's why I'm trying to do it.
There you go. Yeah. Yep. Living into who you, yes. That's, I actually saw, I'm not going to say the quote totally correct, I know, but it's about, how does that future self operate? Like, who is that person? And then that you want to be, right? Like, how does that expert or whatever, how do they do what they do?
Mm-hmm.
And then you figure out what it is, and then you figure out how to get there.
And then you do it.
And then you do it. It's like, it's a great way to probably wrap this up. So one last question for you. What has been saving you, or what has been so helpful during this time of quarantine? It's one thing. One or two, if there's a few.
Saving me in what sense, though?
Well, I don't know. What's just been helpful? What's been helpful?
What's been helpful was that the 2 years previous to this was absolute chaos in my life. So I feel like I am very okay with uncertain futures.
Sure. Yep. Okay.
I don't feel stressed at all.
Yeah.
So, but that's because, everything, I sold my clinic and got divorced within 3 months. And so those were major changes that put you into a tailspin in many ways. And so in dealing with that, so that's it for me.
Yeah.
But also another one would be trusting that I'll know what to do whenever I need to know what to do.
That's perfect.
That gets me through it. Like, I can't handle what circumstances that are not in front of me right now that I can't do anything about, but I know that I could, and I know that I will.
Right. There's always something. Yep, absolutely. Well, Dr. Ryan, thank you very much for spending this time. I know that I got a lot out of this for sure. And I know that there's a lot of people that will also, I know they'll enjoy this as well. So again, just to repeat, you guys can find him at themovementfix.com and thettool.com. And if you have any questions, you can definitely post below and I'll watch them for sure. And I'll tag Ryan if there's any that come up. So thanks again. And hopefully we'll get to do this again. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, I appreciate you asking me on, and I appreciate the questions and, all the work that goes into producing a show. So thank you for that.
On the other side.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a great day, you guys, and we'll see you on the next episode.